Now, the more globalized countries become, the more they open up to and absorb different cultures from abroad. Now, a key part of that is the influx of foreign words and expressions into their native languages. Now, activists worry, though, however, in South Korea, the trend has now reached a tipping point and is threatening public communication. Now, it's a social phenomenon our Han Seong-woo zoomed in on for our news features tonight.
Nearly 8 years have passed since the parliamentary badge that South Korean lawmakers don on their chests was changed from one imprinted with a Chinese character on it to one with the word gukhoe, meaning National Assembly, written in Hangul, the Korean alphabet. But still, it's not hard today to find words from other languages, especially English, used instead of Korean words with the same exact definition. And in some cases, this overuse of foreign language is harming communication.
I was at a subway station one day when I noticed a button on the wall with the English word emergency on it. In an urgent situation, how are people who don't know English supposed to know whether to press it or not? It reflects a lack of consideration for public safety.
Activists say the overuse has increased recently, with the COVID-19 pandemic introducing English medical terms previously unheard of in Korea, like cohort and booster shot, which at one point on public platforms weren't translated into Korean but simply pronounced as such, cohort and booster shot.
At first, we started using those words without much thought before realizing that it wasn't an appropriate method of conveying accurate and necessary medical information to the ordinary public.
At a glance, it's easy to brush it off as yet another example of globalization. After all, private businesses have already made wide use of such words for marketing purposes, to export goods and services.
It's a tad uncomfortable for us, the oldies, but that's where the world is going, and we should follow it.
It's always beautiful to see when people try to keep up with the time in some way, since business nowadays is more, and communication also, is more like English-based, let's say like this, like you have to relate to more people, like it's good.
But some people say the unnecessary adoption of foreign expressions may prevent a country's mother tongue from being preserved properly.
But when you substitute a word that you already have in another language like English, for example, maybe it's the same thing we were talking about. We are losing our roots.
Some experts have even gone as far as to say the trend displays a wrong sense of cultural and linguistic inferiority.
A culture of self-shaming for not being able to read and write Chinese characters existed among the Korean people for 500 years during the Joseon dynasty until the Japanese occupation. That attitude of ostracizing those who don't know how to use them, that linguistic subservience is now being shown towards English.
On a similar note, the National Institute of Korean Language sees the blind admiration of all things foreign as what needs to be addressed, especially in the public sector, responsible for representing the entire population, not just people skilled at a certain language.
We believe the reason behind the overuse of foreign expressions in Korean society is the common perception that using them displays a higher intelligence and looks more refined and new compared to when just using Korean words.
The Institute regularly reviews government documents for any misguided use of foreign languages and cautions of the social confusion it may bring. A prime example it gives can be found near the entrance of a few public transit facilities near Seoul. Here at Dongtan Station, rather than using a Korean term, this parking space used by cars for brief stops to drop off or pick up train passengers has the initials K and R for kiss and ride written on it, a colloquial English expression that many Koreans have never even heard of. K and R, kiss and ride라고 써 있었어요. 이게 혹시 무슨 의미인지 아세요?
처음 들어봤어요. 네.
In response to rising pressure to fix them, many stations have since changed their kiss and rides to 환승정차구역, which translates to transfer stop area in Korean. but other cases remain unfixed. In fact, even online on government websites, like the English word archive spelled out in Korean, instead of a corresponding Korean term.
어머님 혹시 아카이브라는 말 쓰세요?
아카이브? 아니 안 써요.
무슨 말인지 아세요? 뜻?
모르겠어요.
The Hangul Culture Solidarity believes the trend violates the Framework Act on National Language, which requires public institutions to prepare public documents in Hangul in accordance with language norms, using terms and sentences that ordinary citizens can easily understand.
That only 20% of the population doesn't know a certain foreign word doesn't mean that they should be left behind. That 20% are fellow Korean citizens who have the right to know like everyone else. Communicating with them in a language they don't understand would be the same as bombarding them with nonsense. To them, it's an insult.
So then, what is the solution? Well, experts say that a complete purification of the Korean language to only use words of exclusively Korean roots is not the way to go. They say it's impossible anyway, considering a vast portion of the Korean dictionary is made up of words derived from Chinese characters.
There are a ton of Korean words derived from Chinese characters that we're comfortably using in our daily lives. We can't suddenly change words like 학교, which means school, or 지하철, which means subway. The National Institute of Korean Language openly accepts the wide use of Chinese character-based words that have already become a part of the Korean language and do not strain public communication.
Rather, they believe the answer lies in keeping the Korean language alive and well by moderating where and when foreign words and expressions are used. In other words, treating them as an alternative, not a substitute.
Koreans' daily lives should, of course, be conducted in their mother tongue. But to welcome and accommodate foreign tourists, we should write foreign translations on signs and documents side by side. Side by side, but Korean first, then English, Chinese characters, or Japanese. There's no need to mix them all up.
A tough task that will demand a delicate balance between an appreciation for the uniqueness of the Korean language and an open mind towards the increasing integration of cultures from around the world. Han Seong-woo, Arirang News.